No, we're doing it. They want to answer. So we're 5 minutes, and then we'll get to Q&A.
All right. You try to talk for 5 minutes.
And you can always use the 5 minutes on the Q&A.
No, I want to do the Q&A. Anyway, well, thanks everybody for inviting me here. Let me tell you a little bit about who I am, and then I'll take your questions. I'm Peter Schiff. I'm running for the United States Senate. This is my first foray into the political world. I've been a businessman, entrepreneur for pretty much my entire life. I've been involved in financial services. I worked at a couple of large wirehouse firms and started my own shop in Los Angeles out of a one-bedroom apartment. I now have better than 100 employees and 6 offices. We have over $2 billion in customer accounts. I have a couple of mutual funds. I do asset management. I do investment banking. But part of my focus, or a large part of my focus, has been macroeconomics. I've been very focused on Washington, D.C., and the problems that they have been creating for our economy and for investors. I've been particularly looking at the Federal Reserve and the things it has done that has undermined the value of our money, the dollar. I've looked at the regulations and the taxes and the spending coming out of Washington and Congress and how that has impacted our economy, the profitability and the competitiveness of our businesses. And so I've basically spent most of my career trying to protect the wealth of my clients from the destructive policies coming out of Washington, D.C. And as an investor, I can certainly navigate and dodge these bullets. But as an American, it bothers me. And at this point, the problems are now so great, the damage that is being done is so great that I can't sit by and just try to protect myself. I need to try to do something about it, try to stop Washington from continuing on this course to financial ruin. And that's where I think we are. I don't think that the financial crisis of 2008 was the end of it. In fact, I made a name for myself predicting that financial crisis. I wrote a book that came out in 2007 that became a national bestseller, sold over 200,000 copies, called Crash Proof, How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse. And I pretty much laid out what was going to happen. And I was appearing on television shows going back to 2005 through 2008. I was on every week. I was on CNBC, Fox, CNN, Bloomberg, pretty much laying out what was going to happen. But I understood that it was Washington that was the source of our problems. I did 2 debates today. One of them I did on ABC News, and I debated this guy who was saying that we about the financial regulation, that we needed more regulation, that it was because of a lack of regulation that we had the financial crisis. And again, nothing could be further from the truth. It was the government, it was the Federal Reserve that had interest rates down at 0. That's why so many people were going into debt. That's why Wall Street was gambling, because the Fed made it real cheap. And of course you had Fannie and Freddie, which were government-sponsored entities that were guaranteeing mortgages. So the free market wasn't functioning because the lenders didn't care about the credit quality of the borrowers. They didn't care if the borrowers paid the money back because the government was there guaranteeing the loans. And of course, the bank depositors didn't care what the banks did with their deposits because the FDIC, the government, was insuring the bank deposits. So it wasn't because of a failure of free markets or capitalism. It was because the government interfered, and so free markets weren't allowed to function. That's why we had a financial crisis. And of course, the new regulation that Chris Dodd has architected and is trying to get passed now with help President Obama doesn't do anything to address the underlying causes of the real estate bubble or the impending collapse. The Fed is being more reckless now. Interest rates are lower now than they were then. Fannie and Freddie are bigger now. They're guaranteeing more mortgages than they did then, so it's a bigger moral hazard. They're increasing the role of the SDIC, getting them more involved in subsidizing brokerage firms and too-big-to-fail firms. So we are making the problems worse. And all the regulation is going to do is impact small firms like mine. I've got a small broker-dealer, and I can assure everybody that we are not suffering from a lack of regulation. The sheer volume of federal regulations that have been added to my industry, the broker, just in the last decade, is unreal. When I started my firm, when I first rented an office space by myself, it was in 2000. And I rented an office space in Orange County, and I had one employee that was like a receptionist, secretary. I did all the compliance myself. on top of all the sales, on top of running the firm. I did it myself. Now, there were still a lot of rules and regulations, but I can handle it. I now have, I think, 7 or 8 employees full-time. All they do is comply with the rules and regulations. It's enormous. I used to have no legal bills. Now my legal bills, my lawyer makes more than I used to earn, just in legal bills. And this is not because I'm getting a bunch of lawsuits. This is just to help understand all the rules and regulations, because they keep putting new ones on all the time. Now, this new bill, that they pass this new law, who knows what kind of rules and regulations are going to be written in pursuit of this. And all it's going to do is drive up my costs of staying in business. Hopefully I'm big enough now that I can survive it. Maybe some of the smaller firms will go out of business. All this helps these big firms that they say, the too big to fail firms, because they can absorb the higher compliance costs, because they have the economies of scale. The smaller firms can't. And if all the rules and regulations that exist today were here when I first started my business, I couldn't have done it. I never could have opened up my own shop. I couldn't have afforded it. I couldn't have jumped over the hurdles. And also, that second interview I did today was on CNBC, and I debated the son of John Kenneth Galbraith. I don't even know who he is. And this guy was actually had the nerve to say the deficit didn't matter. Didn't matter that we owed $12.5 trillion. It wasn't a problem. We can keep on borrowing, and nobody should worry about it. That it was all fear-mongering about the debt. And the main thing that his point was that the interest rates are so low, that we can afford the debt because the rates are low. Well, the rates are low now, just like subprime mortgages were low when people had teaser rates. We've got a $12.5 trillion federal debt, which is going to be $14 trillion by the time I get to the Senate, and it's financed with T-bills. The only reason we can afford to make the interest payments is because they're financing with 30-day paper. What would happen if interest rates went to 10%, which is half of what they were in 1980? I think they're going to go higher than 10%. Well, what's 10% of 1.4 trillion? That's 14 trillion. That's 1.4 trillion. Where are we going to get that money to make interest payments to China, to Japan, to Saudi Arabia? It's not even possible. We're going to have to default, or worse, we're going to have to print a lot of money and create inflation, which is unfortunately exactly what we're going to do. I said the government created this crisis. They created the NASDAQ bubble in the 1990s. Then they created the housing bubble. And now they're creating the government bubble. And the government bubble is much more dangerous and damaging to our economy. Because in the NASDAQ bubble, at least we got some companies, some interesting companies that that provide decent services. I mean, people overpaid for them, and a lot of people, companies went out of business. But we still got something positive out of the internet revolution. The housing bubble, sure, we built too many houses, but at least we have houses. People have places to live. They have real value. We're not getting anything of value for the government bubble. We're just getting more programs that we don't need, more regulations that make us less competitive, more spending that drives us deeper into debt. The same politicians who are now telling us that the economy is recovering because of the stimulus and the bailouts. These are the same politicians that told us everything was great right before the economy fell off the edge of a cliff. The truth is, nothing is getting better. We are digging ourselves into a deeper hole. All we're doing is spending more borrowed money. The government is spending more money it doesn't have. Consumers are spending more money that they don't have. But we're going deeper into debt. So our GDP growth is coming at the expense of enormous liabilities that we're going to have to deal with in the immediate future. And I want to go to the Senate and do something about it right now. We can't keep spending money and regulating the economy and expecting it to survive. I need to go there and put an end to it, and put an end to it right now. The government is spending almost $4 trillion a year. That's more than twice what it spent 10 years ago. It is bankrupting the nation. We can't afford it. They are sucking all the lifeblood out of the private sector. You want to know why the businesses are shutting down? Because the government is shutting them down. The government is siphoning away all their capital that they need to expand and to sustain themselves, and it's sucking it right out of Connecticut into Washington, D.C., and spending it on these programs. We have to put an end to it right now. I want to go to the Senate, and I want to be the one voice that leads the charge against increase in the debt ceiling. Everybody talks about it. People run and they say, "Oh, I'm for a balanced budget amendment." Yeah, everybody's for a balanced budget amendment because nobody has to vote for one. But what everybody does vote for every year is to increase the debt ceiling. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make that a real ceiling, and the deficit spending is going to stop with me. That's a promise that I can make. Anyway, I noticed my 5 minutes are up, so let me take whatever questions that you have.
Do you have any questions for Peter? I have one, Peter. You know, there's a three-headed race right now. What are you doing to differentiate yourself from the other two candidates? And how do you feel that you're going to go into the conventions?
Yeah, well, certainly some of these candidates are starting to adopt a lot of my, a lot of my principles, a lot of my ideas, even if they don't totally understand them themselves. So I know that I'm kind of winning the debate, that it's moving in my direction. But, I think that I'm unique among the three of us who are running in, I understand the economy. I mean, I've understood it my entire life. I don't need any economic advisors to tell me what to say or what to think. I mean, I'm going to go to Washington to give economic advice to our other senators who are completely clueless and who are following the lead of these, Pied Pipers of doom from Wall Street who, no one in Washington knows enough to understand that they're being lied to by Wall Street. I understand Wall Street as well as economics. And somebody needs to go to Washington that really understands that world. And I'm not a politician. I'm not going to office to get reelected. I don't want to get reelected. I don't think any politicians can solve these problems because the problems cannot be solved without pissing people off. Without, we have too many government employees. We need to lay a bunch of them off. And they're overpaid. The average government worker earns twice the average private sector worker. We got to cut their pay. There are entire agencies and departments that have to be eliminated. Right? Entitlements are out of control. They're bankrupted. They have to be cut. But no politician will dare say this or do it because they think they might not get reelected. Well, I don't care about getting reelected. I care more about the country. I care more about our state. I want to go to Washington and do the right thing before it's too late. And we can't do the right thing. And if we don't, we're going to have runaway inflation. That's how all this government is going to be paid for. That's where the money from the bailouts and the stimulus is going to come. It's going to come by wiping out the savings of an entire generation of Americans, wiping out the value of our investments, our annuities, the cash value in our life insurance, wiping out the value of our savings. That's where we're headed, unless somebody goes there. And I think I'm the only person that understands it and is actually going to do something about it and can convince. I mean, somebody has to be able to convince the other senators that Ben Bernanke doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't care how many. He went to Harvard and he got a 1600 on his SAT. He has never gotten an economic prediction right in his life. And I don't know that anybody else can go there with a straight face and convince the senators that they know more than Ben Bernanke. But I think I have the track record in my writings, in the things that I said, to show that I know more than he does, and get these other senators to understand how high the stakes are. And I just need 40. I got to convince 40 other senators to stand with me, and we can shut down this government. We can stop the deficit spending dead in its tracks. We can stop Obamacare because they can't fund it. There is no money to pay for this government. If they can't borrow, they can't spend. I want to take away that charge card as soon as I get there. Specific questions? Any issues?
No, Peter, thank you very much for coming.
Okay, well, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Get information on my campaign.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, Martha Dean, Virginia General.